Hi, I'm Joe Cunningham, and I'm here today to introduce you to my friend, my compatriot, Margaret Fabrizio, and to get Margaret to tell you the story of how she came to make quilts and subsequently Kawandis. Margaret's a fascinating person. She's one of my favorite human beings I ever met. I met her in 2004. I'd received a grant at that time to have my own quilt museum for 6 weeks in the Presidio of San Francisco. And met Margaret at a party one night, and we learned that we both made quilts, and I invited her to come and see me, which she did, and brought a bag of quilts that her grandmother had made. She was wondering what to do with them, and we talked about that. And one of the quilts was a yo-yo quilt that needed some attention. Some of the threads that hold the little individual fabric yo-yos together had broken, and I don't know why, since I don't do restoration work, I offered to repair that yo-yo quilt for her. I thought there was a few dozen broken threads. It turned out there was a few hundred broken threads. But I just wanted to spend time with Margaret. And so she sat at the quilt frame with me that week as I worked along on both the quilt that I was working on and on hers. And we got to know each other and have been friends ever since. I learned a lot about Margaret. I learned that she had been a music professor at Stanford for years, a specialist in harpsichord music, from Bach right on through to significant modern composers. She was a real virtuoso and had a long career as a musician. I learned that she had studied with a master and learned how to make kimono and yukata. I learned that she took everything seriously. The books that she read, and she has read them all, she takes notes on those. She takes notes on the movies that she watches. She takes notes on the people that attend her dinner parties, her wonderful dinner parties, where you'll have place cards and you can sit where you're told to sit beside the most interesting people that she could mix together and serve fantastic food in a stylish manner. Anyway, Margaret takes everything seriously. And so I was curious when I got to know her what it was that had caused her to take up an interest in quilts. And I thought that's where we'd start today. I thought I would ask Margaret what it was that prompted her to make her first quilt. Here's what she said.
Hi, Joe, Mike, and Santa Cruz quilters. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this, your February meeting. Sorry I can't be there. Sorry I can't even be in the next block, but we'll do it this way. What prompted me to make my first quilt? Meeting someone. I had always sewn all my own clothes, my daughter's clothes, done fabric projects. I had never made a quilt, although my grandmother made quilts, and I used to go to the church quilting bees with her. I'd been exposed to quilts. My mother didn't make quilts. I was busy living my life, and quilts take time. But then I met Grace Earle, and that's what did it. She had recently moved to San Francisco. She'd been an art and design teacher at the Chicago Art Institute for many years and had retired. And she had decided that she was going to start making quilts. This was before the term art quilt, but that's what she was doing. She considered it a new art form. So I decided to jump in. And I was about 2/3 of the way through making ocean wave blocks before I actually talked with her about that project. And that was my first quilt, 1986. And she officiated at the quilt unveiling, my first quilt unveiling.
So that was Margaret's first quilt unveiling. She unveiled this quilt right here. It's called Ocean Waves. It was her first quilt. And even on this quilt, you can see the sophistication with which she started making quilts. Margaret's aesthetic sense was already very finely developed, and she brought that to quilt making. This quilt looks like the work of an established master, right? It's so good. And the unveiling idea, it's so much fun to experience an unveiling at Margaret's place. She'll invite 25 or 30 people over, and we will have snacks, delicious food, not snacks, delicious food and drinks of the afternoon, and the quilt will be on the wall covered by a sheet. And at a certain point, Margaret removes the sheet and unveils the quilt, and someone will have been asked to speak about this quilt and give a short speech about it, and everybody gets to say what they want. It's really fun, and it's a great ritual to have. I wish more people would have quilt unveilings, and I intend to start doing that myself. Anyway, like I said, Margaret's aesthetic was already very finely developed, and we became quilt buddies. We would go around to shows and stuff. And one time, Margaret called me. She had been to see a show of Kawandi. That's the Sidi people, Siddi. That's their name for quilts. These are descendants of slaves, African slaves that were brought to the Indian subcontinent on the west coast of India, somewhere a long time ago. Their descendants made these kind of quilts. It was a show at the Museum of the African Diaspora here in San Francisco. And she asked me if I would go with her. And I did. We went to the show together, and well, I liked the quilts a lot, but why don't I let Margaret tell you the story of what it was like for her to encounter these Kawandi.
Well, it was a discovery that changed my life. You're pretty lucky when you can get a whole new life at 81. I went to the exhibit at the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. It was called Soulful Stitching, Patchwork Quilts by Africans in India, the Sidi people. In addition to the fact that these pieces were so moving, deep, I was very strongly affected by the mystery of them. But what was even more so, I couldn't figure out how they were made. They even had a little movie there. I couldn't make sense of it. I went back with you, Joe, and you couldn't figure it out either. We were stymied. In those days, we'd never seen anything like this. And so, what to do? I just had to go there and find those people in the forest in Karnataka.
So in typical Margaret fashion, since neither she nor I could figure out how these Kawandi were made, she decided she would go to India and find the seedy people and learn how they were made. During these years, Margaret was spending most of every winter in India anyway. She would go during the high theater season and send back dispatches of her adventures in India that were incredible. She would be at the small little place she was staying to some remote location where the demons would come out of the forest with firebrands and dance around them. These stories were just incredible that she would send back. So she was used to going to India. Margaret has gone and spent part of the winter in many parts of the world, Bali and Europe and Kenya and on and on. But so this was not as daunting to her as it might have been to other people, like it would have been to me. But she decided to go and find the seedy people, and I was fascinated to hear about this. And I wanted to know, what was the journey like? What did it consist of? And what was it like when she arrived there?
Well, it wasn't easy. I asked at the museum. Nobody there knew where the women were. I wrote a few emails to Henry Drewell, who had arranged the exhibit, and never got any answer from him. So I went online. That's the way things happen. And I posted on YouTube what I was going to be trying to do. And within a matter of hours, I had a message from him telling me the 5 stages I had to go through to finally get to the seedy women. First, I flew from San Francisco to Bangalore. I spent the night there, and then I took an overnight train to Hubli. There was no first-class car, so it was second-class wooden bench. I'm 81, sleeping on that wooden bench. Then when I got to Hubli, from then on, it was a matter of hiring cars to different towns. When I got to the next town, I was to go to the Catholic Church and ask for Father Jerome, who would arrange me to get a car to go to the next town. And when I got to the next town, I hired a car to take me to the place where the Catholic sisters had an enclave there. They took care of the seedy people. So I went to them, and that was the trip.
Well, I happen to know from personal experience that Margaret is a big presence in the room. You're aware of it when she shows up. And I could only imagine what it must have been like for the seedy people to see Margaret coming into their village with some Kawandi that she had made herself. And for her to make it clear that she was interested in learning how to do this. And I wondered, well, how did these women react when you showed up? What was that like?
Well, I don't recall them reacting to my work. I didn't actually do much. I was watching. Their big reaction was amazement that I was there. How had I come into the forest like this, wanting to learn how they made Kawandis. So I sat every day for 2 weeks on Dumgi's front porch where she worked, and sometimes with her neighbors. And there was no language, Konkani. There was no way she could tell me anything. So what she did, the second day I was there, she had a very small piece of fabric there and some scraps, and she made it clear to me that she was going to make this for me. And so then I could watch every step of the way. And I took an immense amount of footage of her working over those 2 weeks. The way we learn things and how deeply our learning goes is really an interesting question to me. I've had people wanting me to teach them how to make Kawandis. You can follow directions. When I've made them while I was having an exhibit somewhere and would be working on something, nobody ever really watched for hours. They'd watch for maybe 5 or 10 minutes and get the general idea. That was all they needed. I don't know. There's no substitute for just giving up what it is you want to do and watching for hours. Because there were so many little things. Maybe she only did 2 or 3 times as needed. If I hadn't just been sitting there hour after hour, I would have missed them, and they were really important little things. I don't know how you'd say she guided me. She just did what she does, because she couldn't say anything. She couldn't tell me anything. So I had to just be watching. Sometimes she might point to something like, this is pretty important. But generally, she was just living her daily life there. There's no substitute for learning that. What I couldn't learn was the heart, her heart, their heart. You can imitate indigenous people's work. You can copy it, try to do it the way they're doing it, and you might be able to do it exactly like they're doing it, but you don't have the heart. It's not in your blood. It makes a difference. So I know I had a problem with this when I got home. I was so in love with their work and the way their work moved me. And when I would make Kawandis here at home, they never had that mystery, and that bothered me a lot. I was crying on YouTube all the time about why don't they look like theirs? I'm doing the craft right, but I'm not a CD. It's just that simple. So I finally gave up on that and just went my own path. People I respect a lot were just calling me on it and saying, they're going to be yours. And so I just surrendered and just made mine. I like mine. I don't have a problem, but they're not. I don't think a Caucasian person can dance Balinese dance and have it have the same spirit that a Balinese person dances it. We're different. I got a little off the subject there. The way they guided me ultimately was I went back the next year. I went to their monthly meeting where they submit their works for approval to be put into the bank for selling. There's a very high standard, and they have to be unanimously approved. Anyway, I went to that meeting. That's another story. They were surprised the first trip. They were really surprised the second year when I went back with pieces I had made in the meantime. Anyway, I did get some suggestions at that time that were very helpful, things that they thought I could have done differently. So
that's another story? Really? Well, I want to hear it. I want to hear what was the meeting like. I want to hear what kind of guidance they gave you. How did they guide you? And tell me about the meeting. I wanted to know all about it. So I asked Margaret to please go on.
I timed my trip the following year to coincide with their monthly meeting because I wanted them to see what I had done. So the meeting was pretty incredible. In the morning, they started appearing in this large room, about the size of a small gymnasium, and some had walked some distance, and they were flinging their Kawandis all over the floor. It was covered with Kawandis. It was pretty amazing. Then they were judged because they try to keep the quality high for the quilts that are then going to be presented as possible sales. And if somebody's quilt wasn't quite right, for one reason or another, they could either fix it there that morning or bring it back the next month. So I waited till that meeting was over, and then I presented mine. I think I took 4 or 5 small pieces I had made. They were very surprised and seemed quite delighted. The only criticism that they had was that the rows of stitching were too far apart. So I just went to my room and the next few days just filled in between every row of stitching, and they did look much better, it's true. The reason for them being, the stitching having to be farther apart, was you shouldn't be able to put your finger in there. Because if you could put your finger in there, you could catch it, or it's not a good sign. So anyway, it was a fabulous, fabulous time. I don't think I'll ever go back, though. It's physically extremely demanding, that trip.
So Margaret returned to the States and resumed her Kawandi making, this time with a passion. She attacked the idea of making a Kawandi with all the seriousness with which she attacks everything else in this life. She wanted to make her work as much like the ones that she was modeling as possible. And it was a beautiful thing to see the progression of her work. It just got better and better and better. I was her photographer. I would photograph the quilts as they got done. And so I saw this happening. Then gradually, over the years, what I also saw happening was Margaret's evolution, the way I saw it, to a more personal style. The original Kawandi had been almost all relatively symmetrical. All 4 corners were relatively the same. And they were mostly abstract. And they started to become more asymmetrical, they started to have more what I saw as subject matter, and they seemed to be more personal. So what I wondered, was it a conscious decision for Margaret to leave the seedy way of making quilts, of making Kawandi, behind, and to launch off into her own way of working, into her own style? So I asked her about that.
I didn't decide to let go of the seedy way at all. I think I'm still making quilts in the seedy way. That's why I call them Kawandi, the seedy word for quilt. They're directed by imagination as I go, making it up as I go. No plan ahead of time, no program. I think that's the seedy way. There's the system of the way you put it together, and there's the approach to what you're doing or what you want to make. So it's driven by the imagination and the extemporaneous way in which you make it up as you go along, like jazz. People have asked me, because of my long career playing Bach, how this relates to music. I would say that the traditional kinds of quilts are like Bach. They're very carefully thought out and measured, and there's all kinds of math involved in much of the tradition of Western quilts. The Kawandis are like jazz. You're making them up as you go along. That's what I'm doing with the Kawandis. I'm not doing, it's different making the traditional quilts. So I don't think I let go of anything. I gave up wanting them to have the same magic quality that the seedy quilts had, because I realized I'm a different person and that mine were not going to look like theirs. So once I accepted that, but I don't think I quit the seedy approach or gave that up or did anything to decide to go some other way. It just happened. I just realized I was going to just have to back off and see what happens, discover, try things. So, of course, then sometimes my imagination, I would have some idea of what I wanted it to look like, and I might have to invent some new trick to do that. But that's not, I don't consider that giving up on the things that I learned from the CDs at all.
So one thing that I wondered was if going through this process of acquiring these new skills, this new way of thinking about the work, had any effect on her quilt making. Kawandi making is obviously much different, and I wondered if that had any effect on the way she approached the making of a, well, I guess a traditional quilt, as traditional as she gets. You know, a pieced and hand-quilted quilt. Here's what she said.
Not that I'm aware of. Because when I'm working on quilt that I have pieced, and the whole process is so rigid compared to a Kawandi that I'm going back and forth now a lot between making quilts made up of a pieced top and Kawandis. I don't feel at all the same when I'm working on a pieced quilt. I don't feel like I'm having an adventure, that I'm going to be surprised, that I'm dealing with an unknown part of myself. I don't feel like that when I'm working on a quilt. Whether what I'm getting as a result with a quilt, because of having done Kawandis, I don't see it myself. Others may. I did some pretty wild quilts, and the Kathakali quilt, and the certainly Superquilt. Now, are those traditional quilts? They're pieced tops. I'm not clear at all about what traditional quilt means. But I just differentiate between the pieced tops and the Kawandis. Because when you're making a Kawandi, you're setting off on a trip. You don't know what's going to happen. You're starting on the edge. You're adding pieces that strike your fancy from the edge. It's just so different. So that puts you in a certain frame of mind, and I'm not in that frame of mind when I'm making a pieced quilt. Even if it's irregular, there's lots of measuring involved, cutting, and of course the sewing machine.
Well, like you can see from all of her backdrops, the Kawandi and quilts, they have a wide variety of fabrics in them. And one question that I wanted to be sure to ask was this one right here. I wanted to say, Margaret, where do you get all those fabrics?
The Goodwill, Salvation Army, the sidewalk, dumpsters, friends giving me scraps, old clothes, other people's old clothes, some guy's tie that I had always coveted and he finally got a gravy stain on it, traveling. I don't go to fabric stores to shop for fabrics for a quilt. Recently, somebody made a post on YouTube asking the question, what do you think people don't know about your quilt making? Your friends, what do you think they don't know? Hundreds of people made comments, and the majority of them said they don't know how much it costs. Everybody was talking about how expensive it is to make a quilt. Stop shopping. You don't need to shop. If all of the quilters alive today never bought another piece of fabric, they would never have to stop quilting. When you go into a store to shop for a quilt, It's already over. You've closed the door. You decided what color palette, you decided what you wanted on the quilts, and so the fun is over. Now it's a matter of, well, spending money. And no surprises, no challenges of how could I work that in? Would that work?
I'd like to give a special thanks to the Pajaro Valley Quilt Association for asking me to put this presentation together. And thanks to Margaret for all of her work and honest answers. It's been a thrill. I wanted to finish up today with a demonstration. Remember how Margaret learned to make Kawandi from the Sidi women by sitting and watching? Well, that's what you're going to have a chance to do here. Just like Dungi made a small Kawandi to demonstrate the techniques to Margaret, Margaret made a small Kawandi for you. So the next few minutes are going to be silent. Not exactly silent. You'll be able to hear her picking up tools and setting them down and the needle going through the fabric and everything. But there'll be no dialogue for a while. It's just going to be the video of Margaret making a small Kawandi for you. After that, there's a gallery of images, and you can stop the movie at any time and study these quilts and Kawandi in more detail. You can find out more about Margaret. The links will be part of this presentation. You'll be able to see Grace Earl making a speech at her first quilt unveiling, and find out how to learn more about Margaret. Okay, thanks very much. Here now is the demonstration.